at Batesville Products, we've been seeing at least over the last 5 or so years more frequently, and I think a lot of the impact around COVID and people retiring or owners of companies deciding that it's time to call it quits. Started to see a larger influx of uh, product that was still viable out in the market space that needed new homes. So today I actually have Rachel Weber and Stephanie Randolph joining me to really talk about what we call tooling transfer here at Batesville Products, and really trying to ensure that if something like that happens where an owner decides to shutter their business, that you can find a home for your product. So without further ado, as I had mentioned, I have Rachel Weber and Stephanie Randolph, both regional sales consultants here for Batesville Products. Rachel primarily handles everything west of the Mississippi east of the Mississippi, and Stephanie handles everything west of the Mississippi. Stephanie, why don't you tell us a little bit about a hobby that you're interested in?
I have a few hobbies. Hobby-wise, so I've recently became a beekeeper. So that's big news in the office and in my life. It's pretty interesting to understand the dynamics of a beehive, Tim.
Okay,
That's
very
my
cool.
serious hobby. Yeah,
Sure.
thanks for asking.
And Rachel, avid runner, had a nice race this past weekend. How'd that go for you?
It went very well, set a new PR for myself in the half marathon, so I'm pretty excited, but I am walking around pretty sore today, so you see me limping, ignore it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Won't impact your presence on the live event today, though.
No.
All right. So with that, let's get you guys started here. So as I mentioned, a lot of different things going on out in the marketplace. Anything from companies going out of business, tools you're having issues with. What are some things that maybe Stephanie, your current customer base, what kind of issues are you seeing, or that your current customer base is running into? When it comes to providing their expectations from a casting perspective, and why they're looking.
Yeah, that's a question that we ask often, Tim. Both Rachel and I make it a point to ask our customers or potential customers what problems they're having in the marketplace. As we noted on the slide, there could be a pricing situation. They're looking for more competitive pricing. Quality is huge, right? So quality is definitely a number one problem that I see in my seat that we help our potential customers and current customers overcome. Lead times are often problematic. Communication. What we found with a lot of potential customers and customers that have maybe offshoring they're offshoring their current products now. Having access to their vendors in the States is super duper important. They want to be able to visit their potential vendor. They want to have access to their consultants at a reasonable amount of time, and most every day during the workday. So those buckets are where I find hard landing for problems that customers may be having when they're considering a tool transfer.
Yeah, and I would definitely say being able to access your vendor is kind of been a big point lately, making sure you can get in and see them. They're an easy travel distance to get to, especially if there is something that's going wrong or you guys need to make a change in the process. It's a much easier communication than it would be if you were working, for example, with someone overseas on your product.
Yeah, and one of the most recent things that I've been in discussions with is how a customer could add a vendor depth to their catalog. So they may even decide to have two tools at two separate locations so they can produce the amount of parts that's required for the EAUs every year, Tim.
Yeah, and also when you say vendor depth, you could also think about it as how much capability does that vendor have at their facility. So are they only providing you a casting, or can they provide you a turnkey part where it's machined and coated complete to your facility?
Absolutely.
So I think some interesting points you guys hit on there. There's again a lot going on in the market space, but really when it boils down to it, what is the specific issue that you're having? What's your pain point? There's a lot going on, not just in the consolidation of the market, but you hear hurricanes hit or ports getting shut down in Florida. You got a number of wars going on. What type of weather's impacting your availability to get your product? So I think, boiling it down and hearing you two talk, it sounds like it's a lot of, hey, what's your pain point, and does it fit your current supplier, or is it time for you to look for a new supplier?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
pretty accurate.
So Rachel, when somebody approaches you, can you talk a little bit about, where you start, or different things that you've recently heard that kind of kicks off the whole process of, really helping that person deal with the pain they're currently feeling?
Sure. I usually try to first understand, one, the most important part is the process they're using to get their current part. Does it even fall into a specific casting process? So whether it's investment casting, sand casting, permanent mold, or die cast. So just understanding that process is key. And then after that is why are they looking to transfer their tool? Is it because they're having issues getting supplies of castings? Is their vendor closing? Are they growing and they need additional support? There's all different kind of reasons you could find out as to why, because sometimes you find out that really it's the type of mold that they have that is actually not best designed for their process. And is that something you would want to take on as a vendor, is another question to ask.
Some of the things that we do stepwise is on the screen there for everybody to kind of see. And we've identified really 5 key items, best bit of information within the 5 categories of the best way to transfer your mold. And the first one is always going to be research and visit with your potential foundry or supplier. That's how you build the relationships. That's how you understand who they are and what service they're going to provide you, and if they can solve the problems that you present.
Yeah, definitely. So once you kind of understand what you're looking for and you visit and you build that relationship, you can start kind of getting down the road of, hey, what does your mold look like?
Mhm.
Can you get pictures? Because sometimes it can be a touchy subject on whether you can provide that information of that mold from the current supplier you're using.
Mhm. Pictures are always best with dimensions and very detailed on, what's the health of that mold, and describe that to the best of your ability to your sales consultant, right? Because internally, we're going to transfer that to our engineering team and get with those folks and say, hey, this is the problem statement that we presented. This is the mold that we could possibly be bringing into organization. Is it fit for casting, right? So we want their input as well. We have a lot of experts in the confines of Batesville Products can walk us through that.
Yeah. And if you can't get pictures of the mold and there is no tooling solid model that exists, some steps that a foundry can take would be to reverse engineer the design of the mold so they can understand what they're working with. So when they receive the mold in, there's some steps they can take, like scanning the mold, reverse engineering it so they have a solid file of the mold itself. While it's not foolproof, because there are going to be changes to the mold that happened over time. For example, some of the dimensions might change, but you're going to have to use this to the best of your ability to understand where you could see potential wear and where you can make modifications or repairs to the mold before you actually start casting it.
Yeah, absolutely. And to go to your point, Rachel, about the mold quality is how many shots or how many pores. Do you have an idea of how many shots or pores that mold has against it? Because it's really going to paint the picture of its health.
Yeah.
I think the next step would definitely be, if we've established as a vendor for our potential customers, let's get a quote with a piece price, the tooling cost, any additional tooling cost that Batesville Products may have to do to onboard that into our organization specifically. And then the lead time that would come along with doing a run for the potential customer.
So I'm going to step back real quick because I think there's a very timely question. I think it kind of covers a lot of the different steps that you guys will talk about here. So kind of want to get a response up front, but again, in general, to go across a lot of what's discussed today. You two had mentioned things such as both from the part and the mold perspective of understanding, picture, size of the mold, does it fit in the press that you're transferring it to? Is it coming off a press that's a special press, right? A lot of different things that go into hey, does this fit at current vendor A and current vendor B, or are they completely different entities here? And there's a lot that needs to get figured out. So Mike's question is really around the whole gamut in my mind, because he had mentioned that if you're transferring from vendor A to vendor B, sometimes it takes time for the new vendor to get that part really back into how it was originally cast, or really the form, fit, and function that was coming off of the vendor A product. Um, discuss, and again, you guys hit on some of it. You hit on like some of the press fit ups, things of that nature. But what would cause, or what are some steps that you guys have seen from and it may be in step 5 here, but what are some steps that you guys kind of come across when a customer is trying to transition a part, that may differ from the foundry it's coming from to the foundry it's going to?
So I guess when you ask, are you saying the part is no longer meeting the expectations of the mold?
Yes, the way I took his question is in, from a design perspective, right? So vendor A is gonna make the part, and they're gonna make the mold, and when they transfer it, Rachel, you may come across a different way, or a better way, or an improved way, or maybe just the Batesville Products way of doing a product. What's that process look like with that potential customer?
Sure. So, well, one, doing an FEA would be a first step. So when I had mentioned earlier of reverse engineering or back modeling to design the model, the reason for doing that is so that you can run a finite element analysis on the mold, so that you can understand, based off of what your foundry is capable, you can apply the metal temps you're able to hold at your facility. If there is adjustments to the gating you can make without touching the part itself, or adding either risers or anything like that in general. And then also understanding metal temp, mold temp, flow time, tilt time. Do you want a steady tilt time or variability tilt time? Applying all those things that your foundry knows how to do to get the best casting you can from the existing mold you have. And then there's also doing things like retrofitting it and doing a blue fit, which is recutting the part line, so you're reducing flash and different things like that to help improve. Or even understanding, is there machining at the end, and can you add on stock where it's currently not existed on the part, but you get a better end use after that.
I guess, and to tag onto that, Tim, there's a root cause, right? So if a potential customer has a casting that's not quite coming out of the mold at their current supplier, that that they can QC check and send it on its way to its end user, there's a root cause to that. And if Batesville Products in this situation is working with their new customer or a potential customer with a transfer, we want to understand what the root cause of their issue is hands-on. So we might, like Rachel mentioned, the FEAs, so we would run a few parts, run a couple parts, do FAIs on those parts. PPAPs could be involved. So the brush stroke is very broad, but definitely problem solving with our customers is super important.
I think you hit the nail on the head there, because it really goes back to the beginning. You're trying to understand the pain, and they could be having a pain of, hey, we're not getting castings, or we're not getting quality castings. And whatever you can find out from your vendor, it may ultimately be that what they had produced doesn't produce a good part. So hopefully, based on your research and the company you're talking to and where it ends up, you gain the confidence that, hey, this is the right way to do it. To make sure that we're not scrapping parts, that we're getting quality castings. But I think ultimately in the end, making sure it's as close to or exactly like, if possible, really the form, fit, and function of your part. A lot of times what we see in here, and you two can correct me if I'm wrong here, but a lot of times there's a number of dimensions or tolerances on parts that really isn't needed. And it really just comes down to, where's the part? Is it, and we've talked about this in previous live events, but is it cosmetically seen? What are A, B, and C surfaces? Are we, the dimensions really become what are the guts and what the form, fit, and function of the part is, and making sure that those critical areas are still met.
Yep.
And I think, what I have up on the screen now, obviously understanding all of the pain and understanding the changes that may or may not be made, really helps you with step 3 here.
Yeah, I mean, Tim, with tool transfers, it's not always a quality issue. It's not always a mold issue. It's simply some of the things we had on the other screen about lead times. Right, so people, on-time delivery matters, being able to satisfy that if, you have a vendor that's always late on their delivery, if we're able to ease that pain, then we're gonna take that opportunity on.
Right, so steps to retrofitting your mold. So there's a couple different things you can do. Here at BPI, we encompass retrofitting under variable different things. So one is just making sure all of the working parts of the mold are replaced and looking good, like vents, bolts, pins, all of that stuff. But also what includes is, again, what we talked about is doing the FEA to make sure that we're running the mold correctly and that the mold fits up to our press correctly. Any other things you can think of for retrofitting?
Just ensuring that if there is a quality issue, that all of the parts, as we noted on the board there, that the worn parts are replaced, right? So that would be part of the scope of the work, ensuring that when we do pour your parts, they come out of the mold in the quality-minded fashion that they need to be.
Yeah. And then I mentioned earlier doing blue fitting, but that's always a nice step to take to make sure that your part has got fresh parting line, not excessive flash going on. It's just a nice way to repair or maintain the mold, especially when you get a new one in.
Yeah,
or a used new one.
Right, because we don't have records of their preventative maintenance programs at another vendor.
Yeah.
So that allows us to get familiar with the mold, right? So that when we do launch it into production, it's successful.
Had a number of questions kind of in line with number 3 on the quoting side of tooling costs and lead times, as well as the retrofitting. So I got a couple questions to throw out to you here. Are there any price breaks on quantities when quoting, or what's a good way to look at that?
I mean, we always strive to give our customers the best possible pricing, and yes, price breaks on quantities are ideal. Yes.
Yeah. And how we typically look at it is what's your annual usage, and we recommend the amount of quantities to order based off of that annual usage. But then again, it's also based off of how you like to purchase as well and maintain your inventory. So we're adjustable to the quantity breaks that we can provide, but we will upfront recommend what we think is best for the mold.
And that's just, I think you could touch base on this just to gain clarity for everybody. We could put in a price or a break of $250 because we are experts in our field and understand that mold has to be pulled at the maximum of 250 units, and it's PM's schedule at that point.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean we can't put it back into production the next day or the day after that, but if we need, X amount of time, which is usually about, it depends on the mold, so I can't really define that now, but say there's an 8-hour shift that involves a preventative maintenance on the mold. So that's where we go with those quantities, Tim.
So if I can steal words out of your mouth, what you guys are looking to try and do is really maximize the setup and minimize setup costs as a recommendation to say, hey, we think we can run 400, 410, 411, 5,000 before taking this off to do the PM, as you were mentioning, Stephanie. But a customer may say, hey, if I take 5,000 parts all at once, it's way too much for my inventory. And we kind of work, hey, what ends up being best for the customer? What ends up being best to try and maximize that setup cost?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
I didn't really touch base on that, but absolutely, Tim.
And there's
Perfect.
definitely times where too, the foundry has to look and say, hey, what can we handle too? Is that inventory too much for us to push through our facility and put a cap or limit on what the purchased quantity break is as well?
Yeah, but for price breaks, we're always going to strive to give our customers the best piece price with all those factors included.
Yeah.
So a question around what you were talking about here with retrofitting. Is it cheaper or more effective to transfer a mold rather than buying a new one?
In the long run, you might be more caught depending upon how long the part's going to be in existence to do a new tool. Just based off of the life cycle of the part. But depending upon if it's an existing mold and you know it's running well, transferring can work just as well. It really depends upon where your current mold is and determining whether if it's in a good quality state or if it's at the end of its life and it's recommended anyways to get a new tool. It really just depends mold by mold and how it looks.
Yeah, that's to add vendor depth there, Tim. You might have an existing part in the field that you don't need to or want to transfer the mold. You just want a vendor to duplicate the same exact part from another vendor. That's a new mold purchase. So you know, there's not much we can do about that, but and to answer your question, there's scenarios where new tool is absolutely expected, but transfer tools will do just fine.
Yeah. And you can transfer a tool and that foundry can run it until they get the new one up and running so
Mhm.
that you can maintain your volume while a new tool is being built.
Right, it's the lifespan of the tool that's super important as well. So if we know that for all the what you just said, the bookend that is, if there's a predetermined life cycle or span of that tool, and we know that it's in its last years of its life or a year of its life, then obviously tooling up a new tool is important so that we don't have losses of inventory or assembly for our customers, etc.
So I think this last question I just received as well is again around really the tooling, the retrofit, and really costing around it. I think you know, in a general sense, you guys had mentioned a couple things, but if you guys could share those again. So what would be involved in maybe a tooling cost that you would see from a tooling transfer?
You'll see retrofitting costs, so us doing just what I said before, where you're repairing the mold, replacing any of the venting bolts, adding any quick change plates, stuff like that. And then FEA analysis. You'll see some fixturing, whether you need to have a straightening fixture or a machining fixture or a coating rack, things like that, depending upon what your secondary requirements are. And what also is included is a first article inspection part as well.
Mhm.
You know, I would say a transition to this, Rachel, to give you guys kind of a softball here as you talk first article inspection. But Mike, this really goes back to your question too. Some of the you know, some of this depends on getting that product back over to you, and even as Rachel and Stephanie were just mentioning, if no changes need to be made to the mold, it's a relatively brand new mold, but you're having some pains in other areas such as delivery, communication, availability, whatever it ends up being. If you're just transferring that mold and no changes are made, expectations of, hey, we'll do the sample part, fully machine coated, send it over, but what kind of time are you looking at? You know, there's some markets where you got to get a product out in the field and it's got to be tested for X amount of time. There's times as well that you get the part in house and you're like, yep, looks great, it form, fit, and function, it's awesome. But maybe Rachel and Stephanie talk a little bit more about you know, sampling and FAI and really getting that launched into production after the transfer.
Yeah, so once we go live with the part, it stops at our quality department, Tim. We do designated PPAPs by our customers. Some have different levels, as you know. FAIs are all parts. We do first articles on all key dimensions. It could be we could do full quality checks on one critical dimension or two critical dimensions. It's really going to be customer designated. However, we do X-ray testing, heat treat analysis. What's the
Liquid penetrant.
yeah, it left my brain, sorry. Yeah, penetration testing. So there's a good catalog of testing that we do prior to releasing it to production, Tim.
Yes, and it's all driven too by the needs of the customer. So if there's a specific testing you need that is not currently quoted or provided, we can certainly add that to the FAI terms. But at the end of the day, it's really kind of what is the end use of the part and what do you expect to see in each production run you receive, and do we need to repeat that every time? So for example, measuring the critical dimensions for each part, or is it just specific dimensions?
And finding that out ahead of time is the
Yeah.
most important thing, just like we did on this slide here, is what are your critical specs? That's a question that we would ask it early on side of the project. I think we've had a few customers that we've onboarded, Tim, that had a few quality criteria that weren't necessary. So being the experts in our field, we noted that, right? That's a cost reduction for our customers, and also it's not so much of a schedule drain when we're doing unnecessary steps. So that's important to know.
Again, I think it crosses over on really all the slides that we've shared so far, but it sounds like communication's key. Really understanding from the beginning, hey, what shapes the tool in, what's it fit on, where's the part end up, what's cosmetic, what's not, what's actually needed on the tolerancing side of things. Is there inspection requirements? Is there timing expectations? It really sounds like communication, both from what you had just stated, Stephanie, being the experts on the casting side, and really helping to try and provide areas of expertise to say, hey, your tolerancing here may not need it, or we can open this up and actually make it cast better, to the customer side of things, and really, hey, what do you need out of this part? What's your expectations, and how can we help do that?
Yeah, and just want to tag on to that, Rachel and I also do visits to our potential clients as well to view those tools or problems and understand what the problem statement is in person as well. So if there's a visit in order, we're more than willing to do that, and we do that often. So just throwing it out there, it's not always, just come to BPI. If we happen to be the vendor that you want to choose, it's going to be a two-way street. We definitely love to visit our potential and current customers' headquarters to understand how we can help them in their business.
Terminologies that are listed on the screen currently have been talked about, I believe, throughout the entire presentation. Again, on the back end, this is communication on, hey, where's the product actually end up, and what's needed from a testing perspective to launch this. Can you guys talk a little bit more about some of the different types of casting inspection and things that could be done on the back end here?
Sure. So for example, gauges, depending upon what industry or application your process or your casting is going through, you may need to have different type of gauges for testing purposes. So whether it's a go, no-go gauge on threaded holes, or checking a cast feature that is important to the end process or end use, as well as even doing some different types of, so like we can do pressure decay testing. So you might need to have some type of gauge to help with the testing process, or even checking the degree, like for example, like if you need to do a profile check, having a gauge that can check the profile to make sure you're still receiving a good casting, different things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Incorporating FML into the process. This is super important, right, during a production run. So we have a set amount of items that we check of 100. So first, middle, last, to ensure that we're reproducing quality parts, in addition to an end stage inspection, which Rachel talked about, the gauges. So that's super important. We have a full complement of quality office tools and machinery, and so we like to use those and keep everybody busy in the quality department.
Yeah, especially for machine castings, doing CMM reports on machined parts to make sure they're following the critical features needed.
Stephanie, I'm gonna put you on the spot here.
Okay.
So my part has one design feature that's critical for assembly. Is it possible to inspect every single piece? What would be your recommendation?
Absolutely. Can certainly do that. So, like Rachel mentioned, they go no-go gauges. If it's a tapped hole and that's critical and that's what makes your part function at its highest, then we absolutely will test that every time. We'd have just like, it's going back to the communication thing, is knowing that up front is super duper important. We want to know as much about the project as possible. Of course, we can pivot, right? We can be super agile when it comes to that, but we want to be, we want to know that up front, right? So we're capturing all the details of your project.
Yes.
So you're not so that way, and I'm going to add on, so that way you're not inspecting every single part if it's not needed, right?
That's correct.
Yep. So communication's key there.
That's absolutely.
Great answer. So the last thing we want to share, so again, as you go through the transition on tools, you may be feeling pain from casting specific defects. Stephanie or Rachel, can you talk a little bit about some of the casting defects that are shared on screen here?
Sure, we can start with the first one you see where you have the flash. So usually that you see that one either comes from a mold not closing properly, or it's just a natural wear of the mold itself where it starts to grow at the parting line. So you need to either resync the mold or do a blue fit so you can remove that flashing. But it is indicative too of the age of the mold that it's going to potentially start growing over time, and you may have to start considering how much flash are you getting, and do we need to consider when to build a new mold for that part.
Yeah, I can probably talk about shrinking, maybe the bent or twisted part there that's on the far right, second one down, bent or twisted. So knowing that we are inspecting every piece, Tim, when this part comes out of the mold, it's important that it maintains its shape and its flatness. So building fixtures, flatness fixtures ahead of time into the overall project is important in this situation. So for instance, when you know you're running them, they're 1,000 degrees. We go ahead and put that in the fixture to ensure that as it colds, it stays flat. Cools, it stays flat. Even with the shrink, that could be a cooling too fast or too slow problem. We do learn a lot about that in the FEA that Rachel mentioned a few times. The FEA analysis really helps us understand where it cools and where it heats, or it's too hot. Maybe that's a better way to say that. But you know, sometimes parts come out and they have a little bit of shrink in them. So we definitely have to do a root cause at that time.
Yeah. And some of them too are, for example, porosity. So you see hydrogen gas porosity and regular porosity. So that's the foundry understanding its melt process and making sure all their furnaces are within the levels they need to be for that particular part. Because obviously there's going to be some parts that are actually going to require some hydrogen in there more than others, depending upon the application they need. So you have to understand too what the expectation of the end use is. So again, I know some marine life parts require a little bit of porosity. They can't have no porosity at all. So it really just making sure that your foundry knows where the application is going and why it requires a certain level of porosity or no porosity at all.
That's perfect, Rachel. And I think just to tag on to that, Tim, Batesville Products said it has added, you know, electronic degassers to avoid a lot of those problems.
Yeah, that's a good point and kind of segues. So there's a lot of great information. Had a number of questions come across today. If you have any product specific questions or situational questions you want our team to answer, feel free to reach out as well. As Mary or as we have mentioned early on, Mary will be sending out this this slide deck as well as this presentation. But you know, even in terms of the casting defects you saw on that previous page, there are a number of resources on our website that really go through anything from defects, what you can expect from onshoring product. So if you're shipping or if you have a mold that's in India, can you bring it to the United States? You know, things of that nature. Even as simple as a design guide. So you're setting up a product to be a casting. Hey, you know, check out the website. A lot of information there. Feel free to specifically reach out to us as well. We're always happy to answer questions. A lot of great questions again today. I want to thank Stephanie and Rachel for their time today, as well as everybody else who had hopped on for this informational session. We look forward to seeing you on the next one.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thanks everyone.